It was one of those quiet Friday evenings when everything feels like it could finally fall into place. I wanted to surprise Ryan after his long week at work. Something simple, something kind. I picked up his favorite bottle of Cabernet, humming to myself as I drove through the soft drizzle that kissed the windshield. The sky was heavy and violet, the kind that makes the world feel smaller, intimate. I kept picturing his face lighting up when he saw me, that tired, boyish smile I'd fallen in love with. I had no idea that by the end of the night, that same face would become a stranger's. When I pulled up to his house, his car was already in the driveway. The porch light was off, just a thin strip of gold leaking from the curtains inside. For a second, I thought he might have fallen asleep early, and I laughed at how typical that would be. The air smelled like rain and cut grass, familiar, grounding. I remember thinking how good it felt to do something sweet again, to remind us both that love doesn't need grand gestures, just small ones done with heart. But as I grabbed the wine and walked toward the door, something in me hesitated. I slipped my key into the lock and stepped inside quietly. The living room was dim, just the TV's glow flickering faintly across the walls. I could hear faint movement down the hallway, not the steady rhythm of someone alone, but something else. Then came it. Laughter. A woman's laughter, soft, muffled, but unmistakable. My breath caught midair. My body knew before my mind allowed it to. I called his name once, barely above a whisper. Ryan? And then, from behind the bedroom door, I heard his voice. Shh, relax, she's out of town. For a second, I couldn't move. Every sound in that house grew louder. The ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, even my own heartbeat crashing in my ears. I took one step toward the bedroom, then another, as if my body was moving on its own. The air felt thick, heavy, like walking underwater. Part of me still wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, some mistake I'd laugh about later, but deep down, I already knew. You always know. The silence between two people can carry more truth than any confession ever will. I pushed the door open. The world stopped. Ryan was there, tangled in sheets that weren't ours, with a woman I didn't recognize. Her perfume filled the room, sweet and nauseating. My fingers went numb, and the bottle slipped from my hand, shattering against the floor. The sound sliced through the air like thunder. Ryan's head snapped up, eyes wide, mouth open, but words stuck somewhere between shock and shame. For a moment, no one breathed. It was the kind of silence that ends things. He stumbled out of bed, stammering, "Amanda, it's not what it looks like." But I didn't flinch. My voice came out steadier than I expected, trembling only at the edges. "Oh, because it looks exactly like what it is." I remember the way he looked at me then. Not with love, not even guilt, but fear. He reached for me, babbling about how it just happened once. And I thought, once is all it takes. My throat burned, but I forced the words out anyway. Then you're lucky. Once is all it takes to end this. He kept calling my name as if repetition could rewind time. I could barely see him through the blur of tears I refused to let fall. Every step toward the door felt like walking through glass. Sharp, deliberate, necessary. The shards from the broken bottle crunched under my heels, echoing like applause for the ending I hadn't planned but suddenly understood. He begged me to stay, to talk, to listen. But I'd already heard enough. The laughter, the lies, the way he said, "She's out of town." That was all the closure I needed. Outside, the rain had started again. Heavier now, relentless. I stood under it for a long moment, letting the cold bite into my skin until it numbed the ache inside. My reflection in his car window looked foreign, distant, like someone halfway between heartbreak and awakening. I thought about every moment I'd chosen patience over pride, silence over truth, love over myself. And for the first time, I realized how dangerous that had been. Maybe this was what clarity looked like. Ugly, raw, but honest. I drove home without turning on the radio, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. My hands were shaking on the wheel, but my mind was strangely calm, too calm. Beneath the shock, something was forming, steady and quiet. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't grief. It was resolve, cold, deliberate, waiting for its moment. Because when someone breaks you and calls it love, You learn exactly what kind of woman you need to become next. By morning, the heartbreak had settled into something dull. Not pain exactly, but a kind of quiet disbelief that hummed beneath everything I did. The wine stain on my carpet, the half-eaten breakfast on the counter, even the coffee brewing felt like props in someone else's life. I wasn't crying anymore. I'd already done that on the drive home, between red lights and regret. What I felt now was heavier, slower, like standing in the eye of a storm that hadn't finished tearing through yet. When the doorbell rang, I knew it was him. The rhythm of his knock, anxious, uneven, gave him away before I even looked through the peephole. He stood there, pale and restless, clutching a bouquet of lilies like they could erase the night before. "Amanda, please," he said, his voice already breaking. "I made a mistake." I remember staring at the flowers, wondering if he even remembered they were for funerals. "You didn't make a mistake," I said quietly. "You made a choice." He flinched, like the truth had slapped him harder than I ever could. "We've been distant lately," he stammered, eyes darting everywhere but mine. I just felt confused. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. "Confused?" I asked. "Ryan, confusion doesn't unzip your pants and sneak around in the dark." He tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "Don't you dare blame me for your betrayal." And for a moment, he looked like a little boy again, lost, scared, searching for someone to clean up his mess. He started pacing, running a hand through his hair the way he always did when he wanted sympathy. "I just need time to think," he muttered, as if that would make any of this less real. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him, not the man I loved, but a stranger rehearsing excuses. The same man who once promised to protect me from heartbreak had become the one who handed it to me, gift-wrapped in self-pity. "Think all you want," I said, "but don't think you can do it here." My voice didn't even shake. That surprised me more than anything. He looked at me, eyes wide and pleading, desperate for a reaction. "Amanda, please, I can fix this. I'll talk to someone. I'll figure it out." I tilted my head, half curious, half exhausted. "Who, Ryan? A therapist? A priest?" He hesitated. "My mom," he finally said, almost like a child confessing to breaking a toy. And that was it. The absurdity of it all hit me so hard I almost laughed. Of course. Mommy would make it all better. Mommy would tell him he wasn't to blame. I opened the door wider, motioning toward the hallway. "Then go ahead," I said flatly. "Let her fix you. She's been doing it your whole life anyway." He stood there for a second, searching for words, then stepped outside like a man walking to his own execution. The door clicked shut between us, soft but final. I leaned my back against it, feeling the weight of every lie he'd ever told slide off me like ash. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar but electric, freedom, laced with fury. And I knew, deep down, that this story wasn't over yet. After he left, the apartment felt painfully quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, only reminds you of what's missing. I walked around slowly, picking up pieces of my evening like evidence, the cracked wine glass I hadn't thrown away, his jacket still hanging over the chair, the faint trace of his cologne that clung to the air like smoke after a fire. It's strange how betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers over and over in the smallest corners of your life. And in that silence, I started realizing something dangerous. I wasn't broken. I was awake. I thought about how many times I'd made excuses for him. The late meetings, the missed calls, the sudden mood swings, every red flag I'd painted white just to keep our peace. And now, standing in the ruins of our almost marriage, I finally saw it for what it was. My own denial, wrapped in hope. The kind that convinces you love means staying, forgiving, understanding. But love shouldn't require you to disappear. I wasn't going to be the woman who begged to be seen anymore. My phone buzzed. A message from him. "Talking to Mom. I'll figure things out." I stared at the screen for a long time, then placed the phone face down. Let him talk. Let her twist the story, soften his guilt, blame my ambition or my distance. Whatever version of me made their conscience easier to carry. What they didn't know was that I was done defending myself in conversations I didn't even attend. And soon I'd stop being the quiet one listening behind closed doors. I told myself I was done. Done thinking about him. Done replaying that night in my head. But closure doesn't come when you want it to. It comes when it decides to. A few days later, I found myself parked outside Ryan's parents' house, heart steady but curious. He'd mentioned he was talking to Mom, and something in me needed to hear what that meant. Maybe I wanted confirmation that he was as weak as I suspected. Maybe I just wanted to stop imagining it. Either way, curiosity has its own kind of cruelty. It doesn't wound, it reveals. Through the open window, I heard his voice before I saw him. "Mom, I messed up," he said, the sound trembling with practiced guilt. I leaned closer, staying hidden behind the hedge. Margaret's voice came next, smooth, deliberate, the kind of voice that fills silence with judgment. "Oh, Ryan, you're about to get married, and you do this?" She sighed the way mothers sigh when they're more disappointed in the embarrassment than the act itself. "I don't know why," he mumbled. "Maybe Amanda's been distant lately." My stomach tightened. There it was. The rewriting had begun. Margaret's tone softened, dangerously so. "Maybe you needed more affection," she said, pouring her poison like honey. "Amanda's always been a bit cold, hasn't she? Too focused on her career, on appearances." I felt my nails dig into my palm. That's what she thought of me? That's what he told her? I could almost picture his face, nodding along, letting her build a narrative that painted him the victim, and me, the Ice Queen. And then, in that quiet, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was taking notes. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping into that gentle, poisonous rhythm people use when they want to sound compassionate while cutting you open. "Some men need warmth, not walls," she said. "You gave her stability, Ryan, but maybe she forgot to give you softness." I could almost hear his sigh, the sound of a man surrendering to the comfort of being blameless. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe that's it." That was the moment I realized they weren't having a conversation. They were rehearsing a justification. And I was the villain in their little play. I'd always known Margaret didn't like me. Not really. She liked the idea of me. The polished fiancée who made her son look respectable. The woman she could parade in photos but never truly accept. To her, I was too independent, too opinionated, too unwilling to orbit around Ryan like a satellite. I used to think her coldness came from class differences, but now I saw it clearly. She couldn't stand that I didn't need her approval. And now, she was rewriting my love story into a cautionary tale for other women who dared to be enough on their own. Ryan's voice cracked a little. "So, should I still marry her?" he asked, like a boy begging his teacher for permission. Margaret didn't hesitate. "If you do, she'll never forgive you," she said. "But if you don't, everyone will know why. Better to tell her she failed you first." Failed him. The word hit harder than any insult she could have thrown. Failed, as if loving a man faithfully, patiently, completely could somehow count as not enough. I felt something cold settle in my chest then. Not pain, not sadness. Precision. I stayed perfectly still, listening through the open window as if every word was chiseling something new inside me. Ryan murmured, "Maybe you're right." His voice was soft, but it carried that dangerous kind of agreement, the one that comes from cowardice. Margaret hummed, satisfied. "You see, darling, not all relationships are meant to last. Some women just don't know how to love properly." I almost laughed. The hypocrisy of it all was breathtaking, the way she cloaked cruelty in refinement, the way he mistook weakness for honesty. They didn't know I was there, standing in the dark, rewriting everything they thought they controlled. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The heartbreak that had been sitting heavy in my chest didn't vanish. It evolved. It turned sharp, deliberate, focused. I realized revenge wasn't about screaming or breaking things. It was about silence, patience, and precision. 3 things I had in abundance. I wouldn't confront them that night, or the next. I would wait. I would plan. And when it was time, they would both understand what it feels like to be exposed, not for what they pretended to be, but for who they truly were. As I walked away from the house, the night air felt different, colder, but cleaner. The moonlight caught the edge of my reflection in the car window, and for the first time, I didn't see a woman undone. I saw a woman rewriting her story, one move at a time. They thought I was the problem, the one who didn't give enough love. Fine. I'd give them something else instead, a lesson, and it would be the kind you never forget. A week later, I called Ryan. My voice was steady, almost gentle, the kind of tone that makes guilty men hopeful. I told him I wanted to talk, that maybe we owed each other one final conversation before deciding anything permanent. He jumped at the chance, of course. "Come to my parents' house," I said softly. "Let's make it easy for everyone." I could practically hear Margaret coaching him in the background, whispering about forgiveness and appearances. They still thought they were the ones writing the ending. That was the beauty of it. When I arrived, the air inside that house smelled like control, lavender polish, old books, and something colder underneath. Margaret greeted me with a smile so practiced it could have been painted on. "Oh, darling," she said, her pearls catching the light. "I'm glad you're giving him another chance." Ryan stood beside her, eyes full of guilt and relief, like a child caught between two teachers. I smiled back, but there was no warmth in it. "Actually," I said, "I came to thank you." The room stilled, confusion flickering across their faces like a shadow. "Thank me?" Margaret asked, still smiling but slower now. "For what, dear?" I met her eyes, calm and deliberate. "For clarity," I said. "You helped me realize something I should have seen a long time ago." Ryan stepped closer, searching my face for some sign of softness, some opening he could crawl through. "Amanda," he whispered, "does this mean we can try again?" I almost pitied him then. Almost. Because he still believed this was about love, when really it was about truth. I took my time before answering him, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them both uncomfortable. "I did a lot of thinking this week," I said, smoothing the sleeve of my coat like it was part of the conversation, "about love, loyalty, and the difference between making a mistake and making a habit out of disrespect." Margaret's smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. "I realized," I continued, "that I've spent years trying to prove my worth to people who confuse control with care." My gaze drifted to Ryan. "And I'm done proving anything." He blinked, confused. "Amanda, what are you saying?" His voice carried that tremor I'd once mistaken for sincerity. "I'm saying," I replied, reaching into my bag, "that I'm not the woman you get to destroy and still look like the hero." I pulled out an envelope and placed it on the coffee table. Margaret frowned, leaning forward. "What is this?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "The contract for our wedding venue," I said. "I canceled it." Her expression tightened, a perfect mix of shock and indignation. "You canceled it?" Ryan stammered. "Yes," I said, tilting my head with a faint smile. "But don't worry, I replaced it with a different reservation." I paused just long enough to see confusion ripple between them. "Your favorite charity dinner next month, Margaret. You'll be the guest of honor, and Ryan," I looked straight at him, "will be the keynote speaker. Topic, the cost of betrayal." Her face drained of color, her lips parting without sound. Ryan's shoulders slumped, the panic finally setting in. And just like that, I knew I had their full attention, maybe for the first time in my life. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she tried to maintain that polished poise of hers. "You wouldn't," she whispered, but I could tell she already knew I would, and had. "Oh, I already did," I said softly. "Invitations are out. Family, friends, business associates, everyone you've both spent years trying to impress." I looked at Ryan, his face pale as candle wax. "You wanted attention, Ryan. You'll have it. All of it." For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. Even the ticking clock on the mantel seemed to hesitate, as if it knew better than to interrupt. Ryan finally exhaled, rubbing his temples like a man waking from a nightmare. "Why would you do this, Amanda?" he asked, his voice breaking somewhere between anger and disbelief. "Because you taught me something," I said, standing slowly. "Love without respect is just self-destruction dressed in devotion, and I'm done destroying myself." I glanced at Margaret, whose expression had hardened into something almost unrecognizable. You always said some lessons must be learned the hard way. Consider this your seminar. My tone stayed calm, kind even, and that made it sting more. I turned toward the door, my heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks. You wanted warmth? I said without looking back. You'll feel the heat soon enough. I left them there, frozen in the perfect stillness of their own hypocrisy. The evening air outside felt like liberation, sharp, honest, and new. As I walked to my car, a strange calm settled over me. Not joy, not triumph, just peace, the quiet kind that follows after a storm. And for the first time, I wasn't the one left shattered on the floor. The night of the charity dinner arrived like an execution dressed in pearls. I didn't go, of course. I didn't need to. My presence would have softened the blow, and this wasn't a night for mercy. From my apartment, I watched the live stream on my laptop, the soft glow of the screen lighting the calm on my face. Margaret stood at the podium, elegant as ever, but her hands trembled when she spoke. Ryan sat beside her, jaw clenched, eyes darting nervously at the cameras. They looked like a portrait of grace, until the truth began to bleed through the edges. At precisely 8:30, the first ripple hit. Phones started buzzing around the room, whispers spreading faster than champagne bubbles. Someone gasped. I couldn't hear it, but I saw it in the footage. The leaked audio clip began playing over the speakers, projected by someone in the audience who'd accidentally connected the wrong file. Margaret's voice filled the hall. Maybe you needed more affection. Amanda was too cold. Then Ryan's. Yeah, maybe that's it. The crowd froze. The silence afterward was the kind that shatters reputations, not glass. I sat back, fingers wrapped around my teacup, watching it unfold like a scene from someone else's life. Their faces told the whole story: shock, denial, panic, all the emotions they once forced me to carry alone. Now it was their turn. The video spread online within minutes. Screenshots flooded social media. Friends, co-workers, clients, they all saw. The caption I'd written appeared beneath every shared post. Love isn't something you demand, it's something you deserve. It wasn't vengeance that made me smile. It was justice, finally breathing fresh air. By morning, the clip had gone viral, not worldwide, just in the circles that mattered most to them. Ryan's company released a polite statement about conduct unbecoming, and by noon, he was gone. Margaret resigned from her community board the same day. Funny how quickly people retreat when the mirror turns toward them. I didn't feel the rush I thought I might. There was no thrill, no gloating satisfaction. Just a strange kind of balance, like the universe had quietly returned everything to where it belonged. Lies have an expiration date. Theirs simply arrived. I spent most of that day by the window, watching the rain trace paths down the glass. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Messages from mutual friends, journalists, even a few apologies from people who had believed their version of me. I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't interested in explaining myself anymore. Silence had done what words never could. It exposed them, stripped them bare in front of everyone they'd worked so hard to impress. My story didn't need defending. It had already spoken for itself. Later that evening, I stepped out onto the balcony with a cup of tea. The city glowed beneath me. Endless lights, each one holding someone else's story of love, betrayal, or redemption. I thought of Ryan's voice that night, trembling as he lied. I thought of Margaret's sigh, dripping with condescension. And then I thought of the woman I'd become, the one who no longer needed their validation or their forgiveness. They had wanted to cast me as the villain. I simply rewrote the script and made myself the author. In the days that followed, people talked. They always do. Some called me heartless, others called me brave. The truth? I didn't care what label they chose anymore. I'd spent too many years letting other people narrate my story, bending myself into versions that made them comfortable. Now, there was only one version left. Mine. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about revelation. They'd both been hiding behind the image of a perfect son and a perfect mother. I just turned on the lights. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized her. Not because she looked different, but because she finally looked whole. There was a calmness in my face, a quiet that came from surviving something that should have broken me. I realized I didn't need Ryan's apology or Margaret's regret. What I needed was space, room for myself, for silence, for peace. Healing, I learned, isn't loud. It's the steady rhythm of choosing not to go back. That night, I closed my laptop for good on the story of them. The headlines would fade, the gossip would settle, and eventually their names would stop echoing in the corners of my mind. But mine would stay. Not as the woman who was betrayed, but as the woman who saw through the lies, stood tall, and rewrote her ending. Some people heal by forgiving. Others heal by remembering. I healed by ending the performance. And as I turned off the light, the world finally felt quiet enough to start over. Months passed. Life, in its quiet way, rearranged itself. The mornings didn't feel heavy anymore. They just existed. I started spending my weekends in a small bookstore cafe down the street, the kind of place where time moves slower and people speak softer. The owner kept a record player near the window, always playing old jazz, the kind that wraps itself around your thoughts instead of interrupting them. That's where I met peace, not as a moment, but as a habit. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It simply arrived one morning and sat beside my coffee. Clara, my oldest friend, joined me one afternoon. She slid into the seat across from me with that knowing smile only women who've seen too much can pull off. "You look peaceful," she said, stirring her tea. "I haven't seen that in years." I smiled, realizing how long it had been since I'd heard those words without feeling the need to argue. "Peaceful people don't chase love anymore," I told her. "They choose themselves." She laughed softly, but her eyes said she understood. We both did. Women like us always do. Eventually. The world outside the cafe window moved on, people rushing, phones ringing, laughter echoing faintly through the glass. I watched it without envy. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was missing out on life. I was life, just quieter now, more deliberate. Healing isn't about erasing what happened, it's about learning to exist beyond it. And sitting there, surrounded by books, jazz, and the smell of coffee, I realized I finally had everything I'd been fighting for all along. Not love, not justice, but peace that didn't depend on anyone else's apology. Clara asked about him eventually. She always does it gently, as if saying his name might wake something I've already buried. "And Ryan?" she asked, her voice light but cautious. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Still looking for someone to blame, probably," I said. She smiled, but I didn't. I wasn't being cruel, just honest. Some people never learn the difference between guilt and growth. Ryan was one of them. And Margaret? She faded into the background like a perfume that's lost its scent. Reputations recover, but character doesn't always follow. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate is exhausting. It demands attention, the same way love once did. What I felt now was distance, the kind that doesn't need explanations or closure. I'd stopped checking their social media, stopped wondering if they ever regretted it. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Either way, it no longer belonged to me. Letting go, I learned, isn't a single decision. It's 100 tiny choices you make every day, to stop replaying, to stop defending, to stop bleeding for people who never learned how to hold you gently. Sometimes, I still think about that night, not with pain, but with gratitude. It was the night everything ended, yes, but it was also the night I began. I used to think revenge was about winning, proving something, getting even. But it isn't. It's about reclaiming the part of yourself they thought they could break. And in that quiet cafe, with the hum of life around me, I realized I'd done exactly that. I hadn't just survived them, I'd outgrown them. Before leaving the cafe that day, I finished my coffee and closed the book I'd been pretending to read. Life, I realized, isn't about avoiding pain. It's about deciding who you'll be once it's over. Clara hugged me goodbye, whispering, "You're glowing." Maybe I was. Not the glow people mistake for happiness, but the one that comes after surviving something you thought might end you. I walked home slowly, taking the long route, just to feel the sun on my face again. It felt like forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. That evening, I stood by the window as the city softened under the gold of sunset. The same skyline that once looked harsh now felt like an old friend, imperfect, but still standing. I thought about all the versions of me that had existed, the one who loved blindly, the one who broke, the one who planned, and finally, the one who let go. Every version had led me here, to a woman who no longer needed to prove she was enough. Peace, I realized, isn't the absence of pain. It's the confidence that you'll never settle for it again. I turned off the light, feeling that rare kind of silence that hums with completion. Maybe love had failed me, or maybe it had just taught me what self-respect looks like. Either way, I was grateful. As I walked toward bed, I whispered to the empty room. They said I didn't give him enough love. Turns out I was giving it to the wrong people. And if there's one truth I've learned from all of this, it's this. Some lessons burn, but once the smoke clears, you finally see who deserved the fire.